The day Edward left me at home to find his ex-girlfriend, I had a high fever all night alone. When I woke up in the morning, I had amnesia. I remembered everyone, except for Edward. Chapter 1. The night I realized I had a fever, Edward was already gone. He told me there was an urgent matter at work that required overtime, but he didn't know I overheard his call with Regina. I stood quietly outside the bathroom, listening to the faint sound of a woman sobbing on the phone. Edward, the power is out at my house. I'm so scared. Can you come and stay with me, please? Then I heard Edward pause for a moment before finally saying, "Wait for me." I stood in the hallway, watching the incandescent light cast a pale glow on the floor, and said nothing. It wasn't until Edward was about to leave that I almost begged him. "I'm not feeling well. Can you stay home with me?" I was genuinely unwell. Yesterday, I got soaked in the pouring rain while bringing Edward an umbrella. Now, I felt like my breath was burning, and I had no strength at all. But Edward didn't even look back. He just bent down to put on his shoes and dismissed me. "Be good. I have something to do. Just rest for now." Then he shut the door behind him and left without a backward glance. I was left at home, burning with fever and half-conscious, calling Edward multiple times, but no one answered. Finally, I bit the bullet and called my friend, Luna. Before she arrived, I blacked out and lost consciousness completely. When I woke up, everything had changed. As soon as Luna saw me open my eyes, she angrily scolded, "Edward is a complete jerk. His girlfriend is burning up with a fever, and he's out messing around with another woman. Julia, if you don't break up with him this time, I swear I'll strangle you right now to save myself from dying of frustration." She glared at me, and I was taken aback, confused as I asked, "Who is Edward?" "What?" Luna's face went blank for a moment before panic set in. She grabbed my shoulders and said nervously, "You're joking, right, Julia? Now's not the time for jokes." I carefully searched my memory, but I couldn't recall anything related to that name. I shook my head blankly. "I'm not joking. Who is Edward?" Luna's legs gave out, and she leaned against the bed, looking at me in horror as she shouted, "Doctor! Doctor! Her brain's been fried." Chapter 2. After finishing the CT scan, I sat on the bed eating an apple while holding the test report. Luna was beside me, looking at me in disbelief. "Damn, you're really something. I thought you'd forget your parents before forgetting Edward, but you remember everyone except him." I frowned. "From what you're saying, this Edward was still tangled up with his ex-girlfriend while being with me? Was my brain fried to care so much about him?" Luna sneered. "Yep. It must have been. Probably just water left up there. No amount of scolding could snap you out of it. But it's just as well this time. You can dump that scumbag and let those two dogs be together." I nodded casually. "Fine." As soon as I finished speaking, the door to the hospital room was pushed open. A tall man in a black suit, looking anxious, changed his expression as soon as he saw me and strode over. "Julia, how are you feeling?" I looked up at him. He seemed unfamiliar. I didn't recognize him, though he was handsome, with sharp eyebrows and features. Exactly my type. This must be the Edward that Luna mentioned, the one I supposedly simped for 3.5 years, who was still hung up on his ex while being with me. The jerk who left me alone at home with a fever. From what Luna said, I hadn't heard a single good thing about Edward. All she talked about was how he mistreated me, how he would summon me at will and dismiss me just as easily. Luna has been my friend for over 10 years. We've been inseparable since middle school. She wouldn't lie to me. I looked at Edward with a hint of disdain. Honestly, I'm annoyed just hearing about this simping version of myself. I can't understand how I could have turned into such a pathetic simp. Simping over a man who can't get over his ex and stays tangled with her. Working tirelessly for years without ever considering breaking up. How could I have been like that? Even if this man was exactly my type, I shouldn't have been that person. Edward seemed startled by my gaze, his steps faltering. After a moment, he approached me, his eyes filled with guilt and pain. "Julia, I'm sorry. I really didn't know you were so sick yesterday." Luna stood by, arms crossed, not saying a word, watching the scene unfold as if it were a show. I frowned. Just the thought of this man coming straight from his ex's bed made me feel nauseous. I dodged his outstretched hand and said in disgust, "Who are you?" Edward seemed hurt by my words, pausing before continuing. "I know you're mad at me. It was my fault this time. I promise it won't happen again, okay?" Luna snorted. "Back from your little escapade. Are you? What happened?" Regina's power came back on. "And you finally had time to return?" Edward's expression showed a flash of panic as he quickly grabbed my hand and explained, "Regina and I have nothing going on. It's just that her power went out yesterday, and she doesn't have any family or friends around here. She was scared, so she called me. Nothing happened between us. Julia, you have to believe me." I forcefully pulled my hand away, wiping it on the bed sheet in disgust, and said coldly, "Edward, right? I had a fever last night that fried my brain. I have amnesia and don't remember you. Please respect that, okay?" Chapter 3. At first, Edward didn't believe that I had really lost my memory. He thought I was just angry and trying to deceive him, so he coaxed me with sweet words for a long time. It wasn't until I got fed up and told him to leave that his expression suddenly changed. He looked at me, barely able to maintain his composure. "You're telling me to leave? Julia, do you really not remember me?" When that word came out of my mouth, he seemed shocked, as if I had never spoken to him like that before. Maybe my attitude was too cold because Edward eventually had to accept this reality. He sat down on the side, looking dejected and deeply saddened. "How could you forget me? That's impossible." Luna couldn't stand him and sneered. Maybe even the heavens couldn't bear to watch anymore. "Edward, do you even qualify as a human?" When I got here last night, Julia was practically burning out her brain. If I had been even a little later, who knows what could have happened? And where were you then? Were you cuddling with your ex-girlfriend at her place? I suggest you leave now before you disgust everyone here. Edward slumped down, clutching his hair, his head bowed in pain. "I'm sorry, Julia, I'm really sorry. I had no idea you were so seriously ill." I stared at him coldly. Honestly, after losing my memory, I couldn't imagine why I had loved him so much before. I lost my dignity, lost myself, just to stay by this man's side. And he left me when I was seriously ill, just because his ex-girlfriend said she was afraid of the dark. Edward seemed to be pained by my gaze, and he avoided my eyes, covering his face in sorrow. But I no longer felt anything in my heart. I calmly said to him, "Since I don't remember you and your heart is still with your ex, let's part ways peacefully." My words seemed to be a wake-up call, and Edward's head snapped up. His expression drastically changed. His brows furrowed as if they could crush a fly, and he blurted out, "No." I was puzzled. "Don't you like that ex of yours, Regina? I heard you tried to break up with me several times before, but I refused. Now, I'm letting you go. You're free." But Edward didn't look relieved or happy at having his wish fulfilled. Instead, deep pain surfaced in his eyes, as if I had abandoned him, not the other way around. "Julia, how could you say that? There's nothing between Regina and me. He seemed unable to continue his explanation, his head drooping in defeat, his face pale. I found it absurd. Clearly, he was the one entangled with his ex in front of me. Why was he now putting on some sort of deep emotional act? Edward walked up to me as if he had suffered a huge blow. He wanted to hold my hand but didn't dare to, so he stood by my bed, pleading, "Don't talk about breaking up. Julia, the doctor said your amnesia might be temporary and could return. This time, I was horribly wrong. Please give me a chance to make it up to you. Let's work things out. Didn't you want to go to Italy? Once you're better, I'll take a leave of absence, and we can spend a month traveling in Europe. How about that?" I looked at this regretful man and asked curiously, "Why are you doing this? Don't you like Regina?" Edward was stunned, seemingly caught off guard by my question. I continued, "If you don't like her, then why, after being with me, would you leave me to find her just because of something she said? If you like her, then why are you acting like this now?" I frowned. "Edward, what do you really want?" Edward looked at me, bewildered, his lips moving, but he couldn't find the words to answer. It was as if he himself didn't know what he wanted. Seeing him like this annoyed me. The version of me that Luna described, deeply in love, was hard to imagine. Yet, that passionate love seemed to have evaporated completely after a simple high fever. Now, looking at the man I supposedly loved for 3 years, I felt nothing, only a lingering sense of disgust. "I'm not asking for your opinion," I said flatly. "I'm informing you. I don't feel anything for you now, and you're partly to blame for that. How could I possibly continue being with you?" For some reason, seeing the pained expression on Edward's face, I felt an indescribable satisfaction deep in my subconscious. It was as if the memories of this man had vanished, but the hurt he caused was etched into my bones, never healing. I almost spoke with malice. "Edward, you really disgust me like this." Chapter 4. Edward looked like he had just been punched in the face. He stared at me in disbelief, as if what I had just said wasn't a sentence but a knife that had stabbed right through him. I saw his face turn deathly pale in an instant, but I didn't feel anything inside. According to Luna, this was a man I would have been heartbroken over even if he lost a single hair. I would brave the rain to bring him an umbrella, stay up all night making medicinal soups for his stomach pains, and follow him to a city where I knew no one, just to be with him. Suddenly, I realized that love is both a resilient and fragile thing. When love is alive, no amount of hardship or pain can diminish it in the slightest. But just a single fever, and that love can disappear without a trace. The man in front of me looked so sorrowful, yet I didn't feel the slightest bit of sympathy. Without even looking at Edward, I turned over and went to sleep. During the days I was under observation in the hospital, Edward practically moved in. He took time off work and stayed by my side day and night without rest. I didn't pay him any attention. After I was discharged, I went straight to his place, packed up my things, and moved into an apartment I rented for myself. Edward didn't stop me when I left. He just stood there, staring at me with a sad look in his eyes. "Will you come back?" he asked me. I gave him an indifferent glance and got into the car without a word. Through the rearview mirror, I saw him standing on the roadside, watching the direction of the car. I began to grow curious about our relationship. I wanted to know what had made me so infatuated with this man for the past 3 years, and why our relationship had become so complicated. Fortunately, I had a habit of keeping a journal. Although my memories of Edward had disappeared, I had filled several thick diaries over those 3 years. That night, I lay in bed, flipping through my journal. It wasn't hard to find entries about Edward since most of the content in these diaries was about him. March 26, 2019. Saw a guy in the library today. Super handsome. March 27, 2019. I fainted from low blood sugar today. Someone gave me a candy. It was that super handsome guy from yesterday. Wow. He looks even better up close. His eyes literally have stars in them. March 28, 2019. That guy from yesterday came by again. He asked if I was feeling better. I got so nervous talking to him that I almost couldn't speak. Oh no. I think I'm falling for him. Page after page was filled with the thoughts of a young girl. It turned out that Edward had stolen my heart with just a piece of candy, leaving no room for defense. After that, my diary was all about Edward. He often went to the library, reading books that were way over my head, some even in German, which I couldn't understand at all. To get closer to him, I even started teaching myself German, awkwardly striking up conversations with him. Edward was always a bit aloof, never initiating a conversation with me, but I never got tired of seeking him out. During that time, he always seemed to be in a bad mood. Even when he was reading, his brows were furrowed, and he looked a bit gloomy. I would rack my brain trying to find topics to talk about, telling him jokes that weren't funny at all, and even after being rejected several times, I kept inviting him out to eat. It took 3 months of persistence before he finally gave me a small smile when I once again found an excuse to ask him out. That was the first time he smiled at me, and the first time he agreed to go out with me. That day marked the beginning of our relationship. As I flipped through the pages of my diary, the content felt completely foreign, yet the emotions were all too familiar. When Edward rejected me, I felt hurt. When he agreed, I was overjoyed, to the point that even my handwriting reflected my excitement, each letter dancing with the thrill of my emotions. Day after day, carefully recorded on paper, Through the slightly yellowed pages, I could almost see my younger self, still a little naive, hunched over a desk, frowning or grinning as I painstakingly chronicled everything about Edward. The first 2 years of being with Edward were actually quite happy. Although he was always somewhat distant and never said he loved me, he still took good care of me in our daily life. He would cross the city late at night just to buy me a cake I mentioned wanting. He would take off his jacket on a chilly autumn evening to drape it over my shoulders while scolding me for caring more about looking good than staying warm. On cold winter nights, he would hold me close, warming my icy hands and feet until I fell asleep. Back then, my diary was filled with sweetness. The happiness was almost spilling out of the pages. I had found the person I loved, and I believed he loved me too, even though he never said it. But with so many girls liking him, why did he choose me? And why did he never suggest breaking up with me? I sat on the bed, flipping through each entry. This was the happiest time in my life over the past 3 years. Then Regina came back, and everything turned upside down. At first, I didn't pay much attention to Regina. She was an ex who had broken up with Edward 2 years ago. I didn't think she would be much of an issue. Edward didn't hide anything from me either. When Regina returned to the country, he even took me to have dinner with her. I always thought that they were exes who had parted on good terms and that they shouldn't have any place in each other's lives anymore. Edward's only love should be me now. But after that, Edward's attitude toward me began to change. He no longer draped his jacket over me, no longer held me close, and wouldn't even go for walks with me anymore. Every time I tried to hug him from behind, he would push me away, saying irritably, "It's too hot. Don't cling to me." Overnight, my lover completely changed. His love for me evaporated like smoke, disappearing entirely. Edward started to contact Regina more and more frequently. Many times, I would wake up in the middle of the night to find no one beside me, only to discover Edward locked on the balcony, smoking with a frown, cigarette butts scattered all over the floor. Even though I was right there with him, his expression was one of deep loneliness. It was then that I realized the person in his heart was never me. How naive I was back then, thinking that as long as I stayed by his side, he would eventually realize his true feelings. But the truth was far more cruel than I had imagined. One night, I woke up to find Edward gone again. I was about to go look for him when I heard a hushed argument coming from the balcony. After more than 2 years together, I had always known Edward to be very reserved in his emotions. Sometimes, I even felt that he didn't care about anything, that nothing could make him emotionally react. Even when we argued, he would just watch me silently as I got angry, never arguing back, never comforting me. In the end, I would always calm down and sheepishly go back to him, and he would never hold it against me. This was the first time I saw him so out of control. I hid in the corner, watching as he argued on the phone, his eyes red, with cigarette butts scattered all over the floor. He was agitated. "You just left when you felt like it, throwing me aside like a dog, and now you come back like nothing happened? Regina, do you even know what that year was like for me? You have no heart." Regina must have said something else, and Edward, rubbing his face in exhaustion, replied, "Yes, I got together with her just to piss you off." "So what? You didn't want me, but there were plenty of others who did." I stood frozen in the corner, my mind completely blank. That sentence felt like a sharp arrow, piercing straight through my heart, nailing me to the spot. It was only then that I realized these past 2 years of what I thought was mutual love had just been a way for him to vent his anger. Edward couldn't get over Regina leaving the country without a word, so he found me to make her jealous. No wonder, out of so many who pursued him, he chose me. It wasn't that he specifically chose me, it was just that I was the most persistent, and he needed someone to use as a tool to get back at Regina. I was convenient. It wasn't that he chose me. It was that anyone who wasn't Regina would have sufficed. And all those years of so-called sweetness and happiness, my genuine love, were, to him, just one word: replace. I crouched in the corner, my mind a tangled mess. When the pain becomes unbearable, a person becomes numb. That heart-wrenching pain, the churning of my insides, all settled down. I just felt so tired, so exhausted that even standing there drained all my energy. Even in the fog of my muddled brain, I couldn't help but think that Edward wasn't wrong. All these years, I had been the one chasing after him, and he had never actively responded to me. I thought he didn't say I love you because he was shy, but it turned out he simply didn't love me. The one he loved, from beginning to end, was someone else. I don't remember how I got back to bed that night. Edward didn't come back to the bedroom to sleep that night either. We spent the night apart, he on the balcony and I in the bedroom, both sleepless for the ones we loved. But the next morning, when I saw him again, I forced a smile and calmly asked, "What would you like for breakfast? How about I make you some fried eggs?" Looking back now, I can't understand why I was so humble back then. I was always a proud person, but later, I understood. It was because I loved Edward too much at that time. I knew that if I brought it up, it would give Edward a legitimate reason to break up with me, and I couldn't lose him. I couldn't bear it, so I had no choice but to sew up my shattered heart and silently bleed inside. A breakup for Edward would have been a release, but for me at the time, it would have been an execution. From that moment on, this relationship became a torment. Edward and Regina, both such proud people, they loved each other but neither was willing to bow first. This tug-of-war dragged on endlessly, and I was the only one who got hurt, bled dry by this agonizing ordeal. If the previous two journals were filled with happiness, this one was full of darkness and pain. There I was, shrinking in a corner, with a heart so broken it was unrecognizable. Yet I clung to Edward with all my might, refusing to let go, like drinking poison to quench my thirst. Edward, to me, was that bottle of poison. Chapter 5. I put down the journal. The stories written inside felt completely unfamiliar to me now, and the emotions that once accompanied them had long since vanished. It seemed like these weren't my stories at all, but rather the tales of a stranger. Reading them now, all I felt was pity and a sense of absurdity. I couldn't relate to any of it. So foolish, I thought, covering my face. How could I have been so ridiculous, so embarrassingly naive? This realization filled me with a newfound hatred whenever I saw Edward, because every time I looked at him, I was reminded of those days when I was as submissive as a dog, and he was the one who had trampled on my dignity. He really did turn me into a dog, one that he could summon and dismiss at will. I looked at Edward's pale face and thought, how dare he? It had been over half a month since Edward last came to see me, and when I saw him again, he looked much more haggard, burdened by fatigue. There were dark circles under his eyes. His chin was covered in stubble, and his bloodshot eyes stared at me. I don't know if it was my imagination, but I thought I saw a trace of pleading in his gaze. I sneered internally. How could that be? Edward had never pleaded with me before. Between us, I was always the one begging, but things were different now. I looked at him coldly and said with disgust, "Why aren't you with Regina? What are you doing here?" Edward flinched under my gaze and hastily lowered his head. After a moment, he spoke hoarsely, "Julia, let's talk." I reached to close the door. "There's nothing to talk about. Let's part ways peacefully. This isn't what you've always wanted." Edward blocked the door, pleading, "We've been together for 3 years. Even if you want to break up, we should at least have a proper conversation. Shouldn't we?" I thought about it and agreed. This relationship needed closure, not for the person I was now, but for the girl who used to bite her lip until it bled in the middle of the night, too afraid to cry out loud. I opened the door and let Edward in. Edward looked like he had been drinking. The smell of alcohol was overwhelming, and he was unsteady on his feet. He collapsed onto the sofa, rubbed his face, and spoke in a voice hoarse from too much smoking. "Julia, it wasn't until you left that I realized I really can't let you go. I want to make it up to you." He looked up, his eyes red. "Can you give me another chance?" He looked so sad, as if he had been the one hurt all along. A surge of anger welled up inside me. How could he appear in front of me as the victim? The truth was, I had been the one hurt by him all this time. I sneered, "Edward, have you lost your mind too? Don't you remember what you said to Regina on the balcony?" Edward's head shot up. I held up the journal and repeated each word. "I got together with her just to piss you off." "So what? You didn't want me, but there were plenty of others who did. Is Regina giving you trouble again?" Do you need me, your willing pawn, to help you upset her? Edward looked like he had been struck by lightning. You heard that? I scoffed. You were so loud. Even a deaf person would have heard it. Regina left you behind like a dog when she went abroad. So you found me to spite her. Was I just that convenient as a tool for you? I'm begging you, Edward, I said, staring at him with hatred. We've had no real animosity, and I was devoted to you for 3 years. What kind of grudge do you have against me that you felt the need to torment me over and over? Can't you find someone else to ruin? The pain in Edward's eyes deepened layer by layer, and his face turned ashen, all color draining from it. It's not like that. I didn't want to use you to get back at her. I was. He couldn't finish his sentence, clutching his head in anguish. Yes, at first. I did get together with you to spite Regina. I admit that. But in the past few days while you were gone, I suddenly realized I haven't thought about Regina at all. My mind was filled with nothing but you. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep every time I closed my eyes. I saw your face, Julia. My feelings for Regina were probably just a stubbornness from my youth. Something that became an obsession. I'm only now realizing how I really feel. I do love you, he said, looking up at me with pleading eyes. If this had been before, hearing those words would have made me deliriously happy. The journals detailed how, when I couldn't take it anymore, I would fantasize about Edward eventually falling in love with me, about the day he would realize my worth and beg at my feet. But now that the day had come, all those memories were gone. I felt nothing but mockery. Love that arrives too late is better left unspoken. If a simple sentence could erase all the hurt, then what were all those silent tears in the dead of night worth? I looked at him and softly asked, "So what, Edward?" He froze. I continued, "You suddenly realized your true feelings, and I'm supposed to just run back to you? You don't owe me an apology," I said as I stood up, looking him in the eyes and speaking each word clearly. "The Julia who loved you died the night you left her alone at home because of Regina." Edward swayed on his feet, his eyes filled with unbearable pain. I pointed to the door and said, "Leave." Chapter 6. When Edward left, he looked utterly lost, as if someone had stripped away his very soul, leaving behind nothing but an empty shell. Now that I've distanced myself from this relationship, I can somewhat understand what was really going on with him. It was simply the case of the unattainable is always the most desirable. Did he truly love Regina that much? I used to think he was madly in love with her, but now I'm not so sure. If he really loved Regina that much, he could have easily used this opportunity to be with her. From my perspective, his feelings for Regina were just as he described, a stubborn person who was used to being chased, getting rejected for the first time, and that resentment turning into an obsession. But even that obsession didn't outweigh his pride. He never lowered his head to Regina, never tried to win her back. And as for me, I doubt he liked me as much as he claimed. He was simply used to being with me, and only when I left did he feel uncomfortable. I pulled back the curtains and saw that Edward hadn't left yet. He was still standing under a sycamore tree outside my building. His khaki coat flapped in the wind, and he looked thinner, standing there with an air of loneliness. The wind outside grew stronger, and I heard the sound of raindrops hitting the window. It started to rain, but Edward didn't leave. He seemed oblivious to the rain, smoking one cigarette after another, the glow of the cigarette tip flickering in the gloomy weather. The rain quickly intensified, drenching him and extinguishing his cigarette, but he stood there motionless, letting the rain soak him completely. As the night grew darker, there was hardly anyone around. Under the dim streetlight, he stood alone, as if rooted to the spot, unmoving. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Edward. "If I go through all the pain you've suffered, would you be willing to forgive me once?" I watched him standing in the rain, then pulled the curtains shut. What's the point of this act now? The pain I endured won't lessen by a single bit. There was a time when I feared he'd get soaked in the rain, so I braved a storm, crossing the entire city to bring him an umbrella. Now, I watched him getting drenched in the downpour, and felt nothing. I only thought, what goes around comes around, and the heavens spare no one. I didn't expect Regina to come looking for me, When I received a message from Regina saying she wanted to talk, I didn't take it seriously. I didn't want anything to do with this woman, so I simply ignored her. Who would have thought she'd somehow get my address and block me when I went downstairs for a walk? I looked at the woman in a long trench coat, wearing sunglasses with her bright red lips perfectly contoured. She was a strikingly beautiful woman, the kind of beauty that carried an edge. I started to understand why Edward was so unwilling to let her go. To put it bluntly, Regina and Edward were the same type of person. They were both born with advantages in looks, family, or abilities that set them above others. They were used to being pursued and accustomed to their pride. Perhaps the attraction between her and Edward was that of two similar beings. Julia, right? Hello, I'm Regina. Regina extended her hand, nails painted a deep wine red, her head slightly lifted, her expression cool. I frowned and didn't shake her hand. I had a natural aversion to this woman, although my memories of her had faded. The underlying hostility remained. She and Edward had inflicted countless wounds on my heart, leaving it riddled with scars. Even though I had lost my memories, those old wounds hadn't healed, and seeing her now sank my mood to the bottom. I pretended not to see her and walked right past. I didn't like Regina, not just because she was Edward's unforgettable first love, but because she knowingly interfered in our relationship without any guilt. She was the type who always put herself first, never caring if she hurt others, with no moral boundaries and utter selfishness. Regina called after me. Wait, I want to talk to you about Edward. I turned back and looked at her coldly. I've lost my memory. If you want Edward, take him. There's nothing for us to talk about. Regina smoothed her hair and smirked slightly. I'm sure you don't want to make a scene here. I just want to say a few words and then I'll leave. I won't bother you again. I felt annoyed but also worried that if I didn't deal with her now, she might keep coming back. Honestly, I didn't want to see either her or Edward ever again. There's a cafe over there, I said impatiently. You have half an hour. After that, don't come looking for me again. Sitting in the cafe, Regina elegantly stirred her coffee with a small spoon. I didn't like her attitude. Regina always gave off an air of superiority, just like Edward used to. I'm sure you know about me and Edward. Regina lifted her chin slightly. We were together for about a year, which is shorter than the time you spent with him. Did he ever confess his love to you? Of course not. I had to chase after Edward for months before he reluctantly agreed to be with me. He didn't even give me a definitive answer. He just nodded slightly. Regina didn't seem to need my response and continued talking. Edward is a persistent person. He doesn't give up easily. He chased me for 6 months. He would sit next to me in class, follow me after school, and when his basketball team won the championship, he ran straight to me and kissed me in front of everyone, making a big scene, insisting that I be with him. The Edward she described felt completely unfamiliar to me. The Edward the first knew was always distant, somewhat aloof. He never acknowledged our relationship publicly, never posted about me on social media, never introduced me to his friends, and certainly never kissed me in public. I had always thought he was just naturally reserved, but it turns out, he could be passionate too, even though I had forgotten him. As Regina spoke, I couldn't help but picture a younger Edward, full of a commanding and rebellious energy, kissing the girl he liked in front of everyone on the basketball court. A small pain pricked my heart, a feeling both strange and familiar. Regina smiled slightly, as if mocking me for being nothing more than a third-rate supporting character in their fairy tale romance. Someone who should have exited the stage long ago. That's just how he is. He doesn't care about making a scene if it means getting what he wants. Later, when I went abroad, I heard he drank for 3 days straight at home, ended up with a stomach hemorrhage, and had to be rushed to the hospital. She sighed, lowering her eyes. He's such a proud person. He would never lower his head to me, only finding other ways to hurt me. It must have been hard on you. I listened to her words, which seemed sympathetic but were laced with disdain, and a smile tugged at my lips. Oh, he never lowers his head to anyone? Yesterday, he was begging for my forgiveness, standing in the rain all night. I feigned surprise. You didn't know? Regina's head snapped up, her expression instantly changing. I watched her shocked face and sipped my coffee with a smile. Seems like you don't know Edward as well as you thought. Then again, it's been years since you two broke up. Regina's fingers tightened around her coffee cup, her knuckles turning pale. She struggled to maintain her calm demeanor. I'm not here to argue with you. Since you don't remember Edward, there's no need for you to hang on to him, right? Your relationship was a mistake from the start. It's time for him to get back on track. I sneered. What's the point of telling me all this? It's Edward who's hanging on to me, not the other way around. If you're so capable, then get him back. If not, stay out of my way. This woman had pushed me to the limit, whether before or after my memory loss. She had always recklessly hurt others with this brazen attitude. Regina, do you have a thing for being a homewrecker? I asked, standing up and looking down at her with a mocking tone. The moment I said that, everyone in the cafe turned to look at us, their curious eyes fixed on the scene. A nearby girl, eager for gossip, whispered excitedly to her companion, "Is the mistress here to confront the wife?" Oh my God, how shameless! Regina's face turned ashen, and she gritted her teeth, barely managing to say, "What are you talking about? Are you crazy?" I ignored her, turned, and walked away. You insisted on meeting, so you can pay the bill. I walked ahead, with Regina still trailing behind me. She probably feared that I might say something shocking on the street, so she didn't dare come too close. She kept a certain distance, seemingly planning to catch up with me once I entered the building to have a proper confrontation. I was getting annoyed and was about to turn around to confront her when I suddenly saw someone leaning against the tree near the entrance, a cigarette between his fingers, surrounded by a haze of smoke. Edward. Great. Now all three of us were here. Edward saw me from a distance, and a smile started to form on his face as he raised his hand to wave. But then he noticed Regina behind me, and the smile instantly vanished. His hand froze in midair. He quickly extinguished the cigarette and tossed it into the trash. Striding toward me, Regina also noticed Edward. For a brief moment, her face turned pale, but she quickly recovered, smiling as she greeted him. What a coincidence. Edward ignored her, frowning as he stood in front of her. What are you doing here? What did you say to her? The smile on Regina's face faltered. She forced a smile. I didn't say anything, just chatted a bit. Edward's voice was tinged with suppressed anger. I told you not to come near her. What exactly are you trying to do? I watched coldly from the side. This was quite a change. Edward used to say these exact words to me, repeatedly warning me not to approach Regina, and I listened to him, never going to find her. But now, the one he was warning had become Regina. It seemed that the roles between the three of us had completely reversed. Regina, apparently feeling humiliated by being scolded by Edward in front of me, dropped her smile. Her face darkened as she glared at Edward. Edward, what the hell is wrong with you? You were the one who pursued me back then, and now you're telling me to leave? What do you take me for? I crossed my arms and watched the drama unfold. Edward glanced at me, then lowered his voice. Stop causing a scene. I won't come looking for you again. We broke up a long time ago. Regina clenched her fists tightly. You think it's that easy? What about everything you did before? She turned to glare at me, raising her voice. Do you know that Edward contacted me every night while he was with you? Do you know what he said to me? Her mouth curled into a malicious smile. He reminisced about the past with me, said he hated that I abandoned him, and that he was only with you to spite me. Enough! Edward interrupted her loudly, unable to suppress his anger any longer. Have you had enough of this? I'm not done. Regina's voice grew louder, trembling, her eyes starting to redden. Edward, you're the one who approached me first. Every time. And now you want to dismiss me so easily? You're heartless. The sky was darkening, and the autumn night was getting chilly. With only a few people around, the warm yellow streetlights flickered on. Regina's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she looked at Edward, choking out. Didn't you tell me that you were only with her to spite me? Now that I'm back, why are you still going after her? Edward was at a loss for words. After a moment, he spoke quietly. It's my fault. I wasn't in love with you. I mistook my resentment for love. Now I realize that I've always loved Julia. When you left, I was just resentful, but when she left, He touched his chest, speaking hoarsely. It hurt so much, like a piece of me was missing. Now I finally understand what love is. I can't live without Julia. He glanced at Regina. We're done. We've been done for a long time. Regina's head shot up, and I saw a tear fall from her eye. The look she gave Edward was filled with hatred. After a moment, she spoke in a trembling, bitter voice. Edward, you're always like this. Do you know why I went abroad in the first place? I never felt loved by you. You just thought I was the only one worthy of you. You were chasing the best. But you never loved me. Tears streamed down her face, but she stubbornly refused to wipe them away. She looked at Edward with despair and said, You don't know what love is, and you don't deserve to be loved. Julia doesn't even remember you now. This is your punishment. With that, she gave Edward one last look, then turned and stumbled away, her thin figure looking both desolate and lonely. The atmosphere was tense. Edward let out a bitter laugh, then walked over to me, speaking in a low voice. She's right. I deserve this. This is my punishment. Despite the resentment I felt toward this man, seeing him so worn down and defeated made me feel a twinge of pity. But that was all. I said nothing, turned, and walked away. The wind was picking up, blowing my hair into disarray. I suddenly felt a wave of irritation. Behind me, Edward's voice drifted through the night. He said, Julia, I'm willing to atone, please. I opened my eyes wide. In my memory, Edward had never asked for anything. The word please didn't exist in his vocabulary. He was always so proud, almost to the point of arrogance. How could he be saying this to me now? I stopped in my tracks, about to say something, when I heard Edward shout, Julia, move. I was tackled from behind, hitting the curb hard with a thud. My vision went black, and my head spun. I turned back frantically, only to see a shattered flower pot on the ground where I had been standing, with a small pool of bright red blood gathering under Edward's head. He lay on the side of the road, eyes closed, completely unresponsive. The flower pot had been blown down by the wind and was meant to hit me, but Edward had pushed me aside, taking the blow to his head instead. My mind went blank, and tears immediately started falling. I scrambled to Edward, shaking him. Hey, Edward! Edward! He didn't move, showing no signs of consciousness. With trembling hands, I fumbled for my phone, dialing the emergency number several times before I got it right. Hello? Tears streamed uncontrollably down my face. Building 18 on C Street. Someone's been knocked unconscious. There's a head injury. Please send an ambulance. The ambulance arrived quickly. Within 5 minutes it was downstairs. 2 doctors in white coats quickly lifted Edward onto a stretcher, and I followed them into the ambulance, sitting beside him. The harsh white light inside the ambulance made Edward's face look completely drained of color. His once rosy lips now pale. His head was still bleeding. His black hair matted together. Blood stains on his forehead. Eyes closed. Unaware of anything. In that moment, I felt a long-forgotten pain, like my heart was being torn apart. The memories might have faded, but loving this man had become a habit, ingrained in my very being. And now, with one rip, all those long-buried feelings came flooding back. My vision blurred as I watched Edward being taken out of the ambulance and rushed into the operating room. It was only then that I realized. Memories could be forgotten, but love could not. The 2 hours outside the operating room felt like an eternity. My mind was a chaotic mess, yet somehow completely blank. I could only stare at the red light above the operating room, lost in a daze. In that moment, memories flooded back through my mind like a river, and I wanted to grasp them, but I couldn't catch hold of anything. In the end, all the memories converged into one face, Edward's face. By the time I returned after paying the hospital fees, Edward had already been moved to a room. His face was pale, lips slightly chapped. He had lost a lot of weight in the past few days, and the hospital gown hung loosely on him, making him look almost unrecognizable. I sat beside him, feeling a lump in my throat. Hey! Just as I started to tear up, Edward's weak voice called out, even with his entire head wrapped in thick bandages. looking pitiful. His eyes were still filled with a smile. "Why are you crying?" I stubbornly replied. "None of your business. I can cry if I want to." Edward closed his eyes to rest for a moment, then struggled to open them again, his voice so weak it was barely audible. "Julia, will you forgive me?" He looked like he was on the brink of death, and for a moment, I panicked, wanting to agree, but for some reason, the word forgive got stuck in my throat and wouldn't come out. Edward glanced at me, a hint of disappointment flickering in his eyes. Just as I was about to speak, a doctor approached and said to me, "You must be the family member. The patient's fine. The flower pot only caused a minor surface wound. The CT scan shows no significant impact, but he might have a mild concussion, so he'll need to be monitored." I blinked. "He's okay?" The doctor gave me a sidelong glance. "What? Are you disappointed?" I was dumbfounded and quickly waved my hands. No, it's just." I looked at Edward lying in the hospital bed. He was pretending to sleep, but the corners of his mouth couldn't stop curving upward, his eyelashes trembling slightly. Damn it, I'd been tricked. All those tears for nothing. I put on a cold face. "Okay, I understand." After the doctor left, Edward finally dared to open his eyes. He gave me a sheepish smile and grabbed my hand. "I'm sorry. He lowered his head, giving a bitter smile. "You haven't worried about me like that in a long time." My heart skipped a beat, and suddenly, memories of those sleepless nights came rushing back. Without thinking, I pulled my hand away from his. Chapter 7. Edward didn't have any family in the area, so during his hospital stay, it was up to me to take care of him. Regina visited once, and though I didn't know what she and Edward talked about, I noticed that when she left, she gave me a complex look, her eyes showing signs of tears. I didn't say anything and walked into the hospital room. Edward was sitting on the bed, staring out the window. When he saw me come in, his eyes lit up slightly. "Julia." I sat down in the chair beside his bed, unsure of what to say. Edward hesitated, then said, "I just talked things through with Regina. She won't come looking for me again." I glanced at him without saying a word. Edward continued, "I've been thinking a lot these past few days. It's strange, really. Getting hit on the head seems to have cleared my mind." He let out a low laugh. "Actually, Regina saw things more clearly than I did. All along, maybe I never really loved her. I was just used to having the best. Everyone was dating, so I thought I needed to be with the prettiest, most impressive girl. When we were together, it just felt like it was supposed to be that way. I never felt the kind of anxiety I do now." Edward sat there in his hospital gown, head bowed. He rarely showed this kind of vulnerability, as if he were completely exposing his heart to me. Then she went abroad, and honestly, most of what I felt was just resentment. I'd never been dumped before, and I thought it was humiliating. He gave a bitter smile. "Looking back now, it was so foolish. I've never understood my own heart. Even with you, it was only when you left that I realized I had already fallen for you." I had no words in response. "You've regained your memory, haven't you?" Edward's smile turned bitter. I looked at him. After 3 years of sharing a bed, we knew each other better than we knew ourselves. It didn't surprise me that he could tell. "When did you realize it?" I asked. Edward forced a smile. "In the ambulance," he said, his eyes filled with a touch of longing. He tried to smile, but it came out strained. "Finally," he said quietly, "the way you looked at me, it was the same as before." A sharp pain shot through my heart, and I remained silent. Edward tilted his head back, pulling out a forced smile, though it looked anything but sincere. "You still love me, don't you?" I looked at him steadily and said, "Yes." When my memory returned, so did the love. I didn't want to love this man. Loving him had left me covered in wounds, but I was deeply entangled, unable to extricate myself. A glimmer of hope flickered in Edward's eyes, only to be quickly extinguished. "But you won't forgive me, will you?" I thought for a moment, then stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the leaves had turned yellow, forming a thick carpet on the ground. I looked at the bare branches and suddenly, for no reason, remembered that story. The child on the sickbed said that when the last leaf fell from the tree, his life would end. Edward was alive and well, but something had died. Our love had died, and what's dead cannot be resurrected. With my back to Edward, I spoke softly. Yes, I remember everything, and I still love you, but I won't forgive you. Before, I was blinded by love. It was only after I lost my memory that I realized how wrong I had been. Life isn't just about love, and love isn't worth sacrificing my dignity. I turned to look at Edward, meeting his gaze seriously. Edward, what's lost is lost. Mistakes can be corrected, but time can't be turned back. I can't pretend it never happened. If I got back together with you, I'd think about how you left me alone and sick just because of something Regina said. That would be a thorn in my heart forever. I would never be happy if I forgave you. I walked over and took his hand, speaking calmly. I wouldn't be able to forgive myself. I've been hurt enough. This was the first time we had an honest conversation since our breakup. We both laid our hearts bare for each other. Edward's eyes turned red, and he seemed crushed under the weight of my words. He gripped my hand tightly, his voice hoarse as he pleaded. I won't do it again, I swear I won't. Just give me one more chance, please? He suddenly broke down, burying his head in my hand, sobbing uncontrollably, his whole body trembling. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Please, I'm begging you. His hot tears fell on my hand, making my heart tremble. I'm sorry. My voice choked with emotion. I used to love you more than I loved myself, but now, I think I need to love myself first. Edward's body seemed to collapse inch by inch, his sobs muffled as he clung to my hand. This once proud, strong man had finally been broken, bringing out his most precious pride. But it was too late. There was no going back. I wiped away my tears and hugged him one last time. You'll find someone else to love. I hope you don't let her slip away. With that, I forced myself to stand up, not daring to look back, and quickly walked out of the hospital room. Behind me, Edward's voice, thick with pain, almost overflowed. He called out in a hoarse voice, "Julia! I can't live without you." I looked back at him one last time. He was huddled in his loose hospital gown, his eyes red as he cried, looking like a stray dog that had been abandoned, just as I had felt when he left me. I turned and walked out of the room. Chapter 8. After that, I never saw Edward again. He never appeared in front of me, but I always had the feeling that he was around. A glimpse of a coat corner at the end of the street. Cigarette butts scattered outside my building. He never let me see him, but I could always sense the traces he left behind. At first, the pain was unbearable, but over time, I gradually got used to it. I used to think I couldn't survive without Edward, but after everything that happened, I realized that I could live quite well without him. I went on to have 2 more relationships, but various issues arose, and they both ended in breakups. When I got into my 3rd relationship, things finally worked out, and we got married. This man wasn't as outstanding as Edward, but he always put me first. His phone password was my birthday, and he let me access it freely. He never had any questionable relationships with other women, would surprise me on my birthday, and would gently tell me stories before bed. He even proposed to me on one knee on the beach, pulling out a diamond ring. The days with Edward became more and more distant, and I thought of him less and less. Sometimes, when his face crossed my mind, it no longer stirred any emotions in me. It felt like a lifetime ago, and all that pain had faded away. I knew then that I had finally moved on. Time is indeed the best, yet most cruel, remedy. Even the most unforgettable love, the sleepless nights filled with pain, eventually fade away. The night before my wedding, I received a text message. "If he doesn't treat you well, come find me. I'll always be waiting for you." Then, as if realizing the curse-like nature of that message, another one quickly followed. "I wish you happiness." It was from an unfamiliar number, but I knew instantly who it was from. I was lost in thought when my husband leaned in. "What story do you want to hear tonight?" I quickly deleted the messages and smiled as I pounced on him. The story of the Little Mermaid. In fairy tales, the prince breaks the heart of the little mermaid who loves him, turning her into sea foam. But in reality, The abandoned little mermaid will always find someone who steadfastly chooses her.